AI tools are built by humans. Humans have implicit bias. Anyone in HR is aware of what implicit bias means, or sometimes explicit bias when it's a worst case scenario. And if you are not taking those biases into account when you build a tool, you're going to be building those biases into the tool.
They keep telling us that it's all over for HR. The age of AI is upon us, and that means HR should be prepared to be decimated. We reject that message. The future of HR won't be handed to us. Instead, it'll be defined by those ready to experiment, adopt, and adapt. Future-Proof HR invites these builders to share what they're trying, how it's going, what they've learned, and what's next. We are committed to arming HR with the AI insights to not just survive, but to thrive. Hello, and welcome to the Future-Proof HR podcast, where we explore how forward-thinking HR leaders are preparing for disruption and redefining what it means to lead people in a changing world. I'm your host, Kunjappu. Today's guest is Marni Helfand, General Counsel and Chief Human Resources Officer at the Planet Group, seasoned HR executive with a deep background in employment law and employee relations, which we will be going into today. She's held senior roles at scaling companies and brings a rare blend of compliance fluency and future-focused thinking. And while many HR leaders are hesitant about AI, Marni believes the greater risk is doing nothing. From spotting small, high-impact use cases to navigating high-stakes compliance and recruiting, she's pushing for a more courageous, informed approach to HR transformation. Marni, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Can we just start with your background a little bit? Tell me about the transitions and how you went from employment law into HR leadership, and especially how that might shape your point of view overall today as a leader.
Sure. So I am one of those people who wants to be a lawyer since probably the age of 5 years old. I always knew that I wanted to do it, and I never really thought of a career beyond that. I started practicing employment law right out of law school with a great law firm. And you hear about lawyers who want to get out of the practice of law, want to get out of law firm life. That wasn't me. I actually really liked it. I loved litigation. I loved being in a firm. I loved everything about it. But I didn't realize until I was practicing for a couple years that I had a really strong desire to be a business person and not just a lawyer. And when trying to figure out a way to marry that, it seemed like going in-house counsel was the best way to really develop this newfound passion that I didn't even know that I had. So after a couple years of practicing, went in-house to be a pretty large company's employment lawyer. It was a small legal department. It was a general counsel, two people that did contracts. And then I did everything HR, law, employment related, all litigation, and really was working so closely with HR. And at the time, most of our litigation was employment law related. So it seemed like a nice transition to really work not just closely with the HR team, but to actually take the employee relations function under my hat or under my wing as well. And after doing that for a couple of years, I realized not only do I like law, not only do I like business, but I actually like managing HR, and was given the opportunity about 7 years ago when I joined the Planet Group to formally take on the HR function as an executive, which was new to me. I was very much involved in the strategic side of HR and compliance and litigation strategy, but I had no understanding of the tactical and transactional side of HR. So that was a very new piece of the role to me, but I love doing both now.
That's a great kind of set of transitions that seem to happen organically in your career. And there's so many themes we're going to be talking about in this conversation that arise out of that. But I'd first like to get into just reacting to some news that came out the other month, because fear is often top of mind for HR executives when it comes to AI. So it feels like there's almost been no area that has had more implementation of AI technology in HR than recruiting. And so there's this case that I'm sure you've seen out there about how Workday has used AI technology in the recruiting tools. And now there's a federal court considering more broadly AI in hiring and whether there's bias. So what are your reactions to this news?
Sure. So, first, for anyone that's going to go Google or otherwise search for this case after this podcast, A large component of the case surrounds legal issues of who's the employer that I'm not going to cover here. So, my nerdy legal mind could have a whole podcast just on that topic, but I'm
Mhm.
not going to focus on that and only focus on the issue of the AI use tool, which is actually the smallest part of the case. So, I said I didn't want to create any confusion for those that search it up after, but I will cover the AI use part of the case. Basically, when you mention fear, I think fear falls into a couple of buckets when it comes to AI in the HR use case. One, there's
Mhm.
the fear of people losing their jobs. There's the fear of companies saying you've got to use AI and HR teams not knowing how to do it. And you have the fear of determining if the tool that you're choosing is the right tool, both from a business perspective, but also whether it's going to pass muster with compliance. So this Workday case
Mhm.
is sort of that last bucket. It's a tool that was created by Workday, and the class members, because there are multiple plaintiffs, have said that the tool discriminates against individuals based primarily on age, race, and then disability. And most of the facts that I've seen really target more of the age and race case. So I don't have much to say on the disability part of it. I'm not that familiar with it for this particular
Mhm.
case. What's important to understand is that AI tools are built by humans. Humans have implicit bias. Anyone in HR is aware of what implicit bias means, or sometimes explicit bias when it's a worst case scenario. And if you are not taking those biases into account when you build a tool, you're going to be building those biases into the tool. For example, if you think you only want really smart, accomplished people to get jobs in your organization, and you set a factor for the AI tool to look for candidates who have gone to what Google might describe, and I don't mean to pick on Google, use any search function that you want. Google has decided that elite institutions are the Ivy League schools, the MITs, the Stanfords of the world, and you use that as one of your criteria. Google might not think that a historically Black college or university is one of those elite institutions. So, what are you doing? You are automatically excluding individuals of color from consideration. Another example, you tell the tool it's not a high paying job, or you want to train people sort of your company's way of doing things. So, you ask the AI tool to only find junior candidates. Without knowing more, the AI tool might think, oh, you want recent college grads. Those are young people. Where in reality, you could have someone who's 25 years out of high school and branching on a completely new direction in their career who is happy to have that junior role. But the AI tool doesn't know to think like that. It only knows how to spit out what the humans put in. So I don't know how Workday created this tool, of course, but I have a very strong suspicion that whoever created the tool was not setting out to discriminate against any particular class of individuals, but it's not understanding the implications of how building the pool or how building the criteria can actually find the candidates. The other component that I think is really interesting about the Workday case is the plaintiff focused on the fact that even if the tool was built in a way that maybe it had some implicit bias, you would think that there was a human on the back end who's actually making hiring decisions. And the anecdotal evidence that's been publicized, and I'm sure there's much more evidence than what we've seen, but what's been publicized is that the initial plaintiff would send out his application, let's say 1 in the morning. And at 1:25 a.m., he was getting a response back saying he didn't get the job. And this individual applied, I think, 100 different jobs. And to clarify, he wasn't applying to work at Workday. He was applying to work at companies that use this Workday tool.
Mhm.
So applied to 100 different jobs, got 100 different rejections. And the timing of those rejections at least made it look like to him that there was absolutely no human intervention whatsoever. And one of the key components, not just for HR professionals, but for everyone, is AI is only as good as the humans behind it, both in building the tool, but also in executing on the tool. And that's maybe what could have been missed here with the Workday case.
And then
I get too legal nerdy on you.
no, I'm with you, but and then the Workday spokesman is saying we have to push this out because the claim is that there was no human who was making a decision, and we built the software so that only humans can actually make the ultimate decision of rejecting someone. If you look at this from the perspective of an HR professional who's doesn't matter what the vendor is, but you're just looking at the latest technology and you're looking at it, like bringing it in. What does this teach us, if anything? Maybe this is on the frivolous side, I don't know, or maybe it teaches vendors more than it does buyers. But from a buyer perspective or an HR professional perspective, what does this teach us? Do we just say, okay, you know what, for recruiting, because exposure is too high, there's going to be no recruiting AI software that we buy? Or is there like a process where we ensure it's documented that every single decision is tied to a person? What could you take away from this?
Yeah, Thomas, great question. And I would not say exclude recruiting from the areas where you want to use AI. I think it's actually one of the best use cases for AI. It obviously has some compliance concerns, but it's a great way to use it. I think to avoid the pitfalls, there's a couple things that you can do. First, really figure out what problem you're trying to solve. If an HR executive is being told by his or her leadership team that they need to implement AI to cut costs, and that HR executive doesn't take the next step of figuring out what problem they're trying to solve, it's probably not going to work out well. It shouldn't be used just as a cost cutting measure. It should be used to increase the employee experience or the candidate experience or to increase efficiency, or if you are in an industry where there are a lot of jobs and not a lot of candidates, it helps you get to the right candidates faster, but figure out the problem first. I think the second component is do a pilot. At the Planet Group, we are using an AI tool for recruitment, and Planet is a staffing company. So being quick to market to get to the right candidates is really important. And we are using a new AI tool, which has been one vetted by industry experts already in our field and has also been reviewed extensively by industry groups too. So, not just companies, but other groups. And starting on a smaller population, I think makes sense. So we are starting this with 10 different jobs. We might have 1,000 jobs that we're recruiting for right now. We're starting on 10. We're using this pilot program to figure out how to refine the system to number one, create those efficiencies that we're looking for to solve the problem we're trying to solve and to make sure we're not going to have compliance challenges. And one thing we found in the initial pilot is that our job descriptions were not up to par for what this AI tool needed to be successful. It
Mhm.
either had too many words and too many qualifications, which actually weren't necessary for the job, or it was too high level and didn't actually get into the specific, especially technical skill sets that we might be looking for. So one of the results that's come out of this pilot to number one, help the tool be successful, but we're also using this outside of the AI tool for our job descriptions generally, is retraining on how to create a good job description. And
Retraining humans. We're talking about like your
retraining humans.
process, redoing
Yes,
your, yeah.
retraining humans. Yeah. And again, yes, we're using it to make the AI tool more effective, but we're also using it to make all of our non use cases for AI tools more effective. And staffing, like any industry, has evolved over time. So the job descriptions that we may have been using may have been the gold standard 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but it has evolved and now it's our time to evolve with it.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/cleary-community. Now back to the show. Got it. So let's talk a little bit about those types of fear that you mentioned. And it's interesting because in this case in particular, especially when you take age as one of the factors where it's like a double whammy, right? Like the fear for employees who feel like AI is going to take my job. And now there is a recruiting AI that is preventing me from getting a job and not even trying to do much. It's just like setting you up for rage almost. But let's talk a little bit about that. Like, especially, I guess, the broader employment point of view, right? I think you're telling me it's like, look, it's not the threat isn't about it's not legal per se or like lawsuits like this. It's threaten HR. It's just like fear, right? About leveraging these tools. So tell me more about that. How do you think about these types of fear and how do you overcome them?
I think the fear you hear most about in the media is people's fear of losing their jobs because AI is going to take over. And I do think, of course, that in some positions, as that position moves to more of an AI focus, there may be less humans that do it. I'm not trying to discount that, but I think that is the minority of cases. And I also think that AI is creating as many or more jobs than it is displacing. I feel like the fear is more based on not knowing how to use AI. Is that companies just have these initiatives of we got to use AI, we've got to use AI. Companies often turn to HR first in terms of how to do things. HR has more interactions with more people than probably any other department or organization. HR is often viewed as a cost center in some ways. So HR might be the one that the
Right.
executive team turns to say, you got to cut your team, figure out ways to use AI instead of teams. But again, I think that biggest fear is just not knowing how to use it. And part of that is I think sometimes people are thinking too big. And AI doesn't have to be transformative on a large scale to be useful. One piece of advice that I've given to my team and others that I've spoken to is to have your team go through an exercise of saying, wouldn't it be great if?
Hmm.
And then with that if, you fill in the blanks with things that would make your job easier, things that would make the employee experience better, things that would make the candidate experience more efficient. And one example I'll give, and this is a really simple one, and I'll turn to one that I don't think exists yet. So maybe someone that listens to this will actually develop it after I say it. But the really simple one is I always say to myself, wouldn't it be great if when I'm scheduling a large group meeting, I could just easily see when everyone was available without having to click on a bunch of different dates and look through everyone's different calendar? Because just scheduling a meeting with a large group, especially with executives, can take 10 minutes just to find a date. There are easy AI tools and Microsoft Copilot and other places where it connects with your internal system and you say to it, can you find a time for me between 10 and 2 in the next 2 weeks that these people are available for a meeting? And it will just shoot out a couple of different times that everyone's available. Now, that may seem too simple, but 10 minutes over the course of all the meetings that I schedule really adds up. So that was one of my wouldn't it be great if, and it turns out there's a tool that does it. This one is larger thinking, but I
Well, before
manage
you go to
benefits.
larger thinking, I just wanted to double click on that idea that it does seem small, but it's creating those habits and every day just asking yourself, what would it be great if? And even if it
Yes,
is simple, that will sort of get you in the mindset of getting like small wins and being comfortable with using these tools in general. And eventually, when those wins stack up, you directly address that fear of, I don't know if I have the skills to use this thing or if our team does.
absolutely. You're right. Those small wins stack up. And I think your point is exactly accurate, Thomas, that it's about making people comfortable. So when you use AI in these small use cases, you become comfortable using it in larger use cases also. So my idea for any of you out there that wants to come up with this, I don't know if it exists, but I always think, wouldn't it be great when employees are selecting their benefits if there was a confidential AI tool that could look at their claims history for the past year? It looks at the age of their family, how many people on the plan, what their claims are. It puts that data in and it tells employees what health plan to choose based on that usage. Like, that to me is a transformative, not for the organization necessarily. It's probably not saving the organization any money, but from an employee experience standpoint, how great is that if you don't have to try to evaluate, well, if I do the HSA and if it's this deductible, that you just have a system that does it for you. To me, that's transformative from an employee experience standpoint. So would love that to be out there for anyone listening.
That's awesome. And it actually addresses the question about what are you trying to do first, right? Like the point you made earlier about if it's not just only ever about cost savings, but it could actually just be about improving the experience for whatever process it is that you've got going on.
which theoretically leads to higher employee satisfaction, which leads to greater revenue for a company. So it is all tied together too. I don't think you can separate those out entirely either.
Absolutely. How do you convince risk averse leaders, whether in HR or otherwise, to move faster on AI when you know the legal landscape still can feel unsettled?
So I think that if you focus on those small wins that have no risk, that is the way to get even other executives comfortable, not just the HR team in the example that I used. That being said, if the executive leadership isn't on board with using AI tools, I think it's going to be a hard sell overall. And I think if you say to those HR or those executives, we need to be AI first or AI forward, there's probably not going to be a lot of traction and they'll probably tune that out because, again, it's the fear of, I don't even know what that means. So forget compliance for a standpoint. I think the way that HR professionals can add
Yeah.
value to the rest of the company, the executive team, is come up with those actual use cases and how to implement it and what it means, cover any compliance risks. But I think if the HR leader is the one who's pushing AI without the rest of the executive team, talking about it on a larger scale more conceptually is probably not going to land well.
Another version of that, which I feel like is actually more common, which is the mid-career or junior HR employee who is looking to convince their risk-averse CHRO about how they want to use and evolve processes and move things forward with AI in mind, but then maybe it's blocked there. But maybe in the rest of the company, because that's what I think I see more often, whether it's in product sales, operations, marketing, it's leveraged constantly, but then, and honestly, maybe even in legal, more than in HR. And if there are the entrepreneurs who are looking to make that change and trying to convince their leaders, how would you think about that?
So my answer is gonna be completely anecdotal just to my experience within Planet. Again, I've been here for about 7 years. 7 years ago, we weren't talking about this, so my only real exposure has been in the last 7 years here, and I'm not seeing any differences between the younger, newer generation of HR professionals to, up to me in my level. I'm seeing the same sort of resistance or what's the word I'm looking for? Almost apathy is maybe what
Mm.
I'm trying to say about these AI tools. So I'm not seeing the younger generation in HR pushing for this. Now, again, that's just my anecdotal experience. I've got a team of 30, not 130, but I'm not seeing that to the extent that my experience is different than others and others are seeing it. I think the advice is like anything else. You've got to create a business case, whether it's an AI issue or any issue, and you're presenting to leadership an idea. You've got to just create a business case, be streamlined. Again, going back to what problem am I trying to solve?
Right.
Leaders love to see you solve problems. And if you make it a very focused presentation about why this use case makes sense, I think any leader is going to listen.
So maybe we can talk about another thing, another factor, which is budget pressure, which tends to sometimes it feels like universally, you know, HR teams are feeling maybe the pressure. What are you seeing there? Are you seeing more broadly HR budgets being under pressure or HR teams? And does that intersect with AI adoption?
AI tools cost money. I have found very few that are safe or compliant that don't cost money. A free chat GPT, it's a great tool, but there are limits to what you can put in it because it's not confidential and your information is going out
Right.
there. So I think many companies, many industries are feeling budget pressure that obviously goes to HR, which, as I mentioned earlier, tends to be viewed as a cost center. But AI tools will almost uniformly cost money. So I don't feel like asking HR to use AI to save money is an executive team understanding how you can best use AI because there's going to be short-term investments to get the long-term cost savings and efficiencies. And again, going back to the notion of a business case, I think it needs to be explained to whether it's the CFO or CEO what that investment's gonna be and what the return on investment is going to be and how long it's gonna take for that ROI to come to fruition.
Got it. That's great general advice. Let me ask you a different question then, getting into tool or like vendor, like maybe we can get very tactical and practical about how you might go about choosing tools or partners to work with, especially with that compliance risk element in mind. If you're giving advice to someone who is, okay, saying we're on the AI train or we want to experiment with something in some kind of way, and we have a couple of use cases in mind, and now we're trying to figure out who to partner with, how would you recommend someone goes through that process?
Sure, and within that, I'll give you another sort of hot topic that I saw in the news today and how it all connects together with the AI tools. The first thing is get referrals and recommendations. Find people that have used these products, find associations that have tested these products, especially in the HR space. You might have law firms that have already researched these products. So referrals are the number one thing. There's so many companies out there that are claiming to be this new AI mastermind to help solve a problem, but it doesn't mean they've done any of the background compliance to do that. And one use case that we're now using AI for, and this is where the news story comes. I don't know, Thomas, if you saw the news over the past couple of days about all the US companies that have inadvertently hired North Korean nationals.
Yes, that does ring a bell. I'll put a link in the show notes. But
So it's fascinating. And one, some of these articles just provide some really good tools for recruiters in particular of what to look for. But it's just one subset of what we've seen as a larger problem, particularly in the tech space, of the person who interviews for the job not being the person who's doing the work and essentially having fake candidate profiles. So we enacted an AI tool or started using an AI tool probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess 12 to 18 months ago that helps determine if someone's candidate profile is their real profile. And there's a massive risk there in a potential discrimination issue. We worked with other companies that have used this vendor. We looked very carefully at the criteria this tool was looking at. You know, we had to think of what problem am I trying to solve? We had that piece, but we wanted to make sure that we were not either intentionally or unintentionally discriminating against certain classes of people by making bad assumptions that they were a fake profile when they were, in fact, a real profile. So, is it recommendations, testing it, trying to think of things from every angle, but there's also going to be a cost benefit analysis. Everything we do in business has some level of risk. If you say you're part of a business that is risk free, you're actually not running a business. That doesn't really exist. It's balancing the risk. As we started becoming more familiar, again, not only the broader issue of candidates who were using fake profiles, but the potentially much larger issue of actually having these illegal employees who were actually North Korean operatives in our systems or our client systems. It made us realize that we were gonna do all the due diligence that we could, but it was so important for us to try to ferret those issues out that we are willing to take some level of risk because of the balancing in that approach.
great point. And I think it also brings to the fore the dynamic nature of like AI because in that particular case, I think it was like the North Korean operatives were using AI technology to help them disguise. So this is all only possible with remote work, first of all, right? The fact that there's completely remote jobs. And then on top of that, there's AI tools to disguise how you show up remotely, which is being used on the candidate side. There's like a defensive element to this as well, right? So regardless of what your process is, so imagine there was no AI, like no process in the company side. You're just trying to defend yourself. You have an interview process like the old school digital way without any AI tools. You still have an AI problem in some sense, right? You need to make sure that you're
100%.
vetting the right people. So the person who got the job is doing the job.
Yeah, and actually going back to the pilot program that I referred to earlier for this recruiting tool, we realized that AI was able to beat the system when we first started it. So using exactly what you said, individuals the way our pilot program works is you actually have an AI tool that's conducting the first interviews, but it's a spoken interview. It's not typing through a screen or a chatbot. It's a one-on-one interview, but the person on the other end is a bot, not an individual.
Right.
And we learned that when this chatbot was asking questions, if we turn the volume up listening to these interviews after, you could hear people typing and they were putting the questions into Chat GPT or a similar service to get the answers. So we had to evolve our system so that the individual only has a certain amount of time to answer the question, or the virtual interviewer says, "It sounds like you're struggling with that question. Let's move on to the next one." So we are using AI, but in using it too, and not having a human who was listening to that original back and forth, we realized it opened up the door for the candidate to use AI to try to beat the system.
Great point. So it's the cat and mouse game continues,
Yeah.
which is also the story forever in terms of the security. And that's where now we're getting into really, it's not even compliance as much as security issues with the prevalence. I love that. So it's, yeah, so there's like both sides are using AI warfare in some ways, right? Or the bad actors.
But it also shows where humans are still needed because we had to be listening to those interviews to figure out how to evolve the tool to make it more useful for us.
And it shows you how it would be devastating to make hiring decisions completely based on the AI interview without anyone just algorithmically, it's like, up, you're hired, and I'll sign this letter without any human potentially looking at it.
Yeah, can't do
So
that. Don't do that.
yeah, okay. So that's probably a general like good rule, right? So especially the higher the risk, you want to make sure there's a human in the loop. But then if I were to generalize some of these concepts, like you want to know the use case, and the use case should not be I want to use AI. There's a particular business process you're looking to improve. And another element I think I heard was that there's always risk in everything. There's risk in the way that you're doing it today. And you have to acknowledge that, understand that, think about it from different angles, and understand what risk you're willing to take on in any kind of project like this. And then you're also involved in the process. We're talking about training interviewers, and training your recruiting team and writing job descriptions in a different way and kind of updating their skills there as this other element in this. And I guess overall, ultimately, you're starting with a pilot and making sure it's successful in the pilot. So you had more time to make sure the idea cooks and you're looking at it from all compliance angles. And then finally, you have a human in the loop, right? At the end, in terms of this case, making a hiring decision, right? Yeah, AI tools, especially where we are today, it's good in that middle, right? Or in the front or the middle of any kind of like process. But maybe you need humans to both give it the context in the very beginning and also to take the outputs to make decisions so that you are both from a compliance side, but also just to make sure that you're making good decisions. So this is really great. So then, if you're walking the line between championing tech and safeguarding the employee experience in some kind of way, how do you think about that? Or in this case, we've been talking a lot about recruiting tools, the candidate experience.
I think talking to people and people talk about networking, and I think they view it often as how do I meet people for my next job? But I view networking as how do I learn more about my current job?
Right.
And I just think that getting out there and talking to people and reading the articles that are coming out and the news stories and doing your own searches online, there's so much and it's so new that there's just so much out there that I think just engaging in the conversations is the number one thing that HR professionals should be doing in this area, both for the small and the large problem solving.
Great. So then let's talk about something a little bit different, which is about the function of HR itself. We talked about the fears about jobs changing and evolving in the broadest context. But then, given that we are in service of the employees and companies and everyone's jobs are changing, of course, the HR function itself is going to kind of change. I'd like to ask you first, kind of deep dive into employee relations specifically. How do you future proof that role, or how does that evolve in the age of AI?
Like anything else in HR, but in particular with employee relations, and I'll maybe include performance management in that, even though I know they're a little bit separate, is there's always going to be the human element for a couple of reasons. Number one is a lot of the job is evaluating credibility if you're looking at things like an investigation into something. When it comes to performance management, there's the nuances that you can never teach a computer. I'll give you an example in the staffing business. It's very metrics driven. So we look at, let's use direct hire placements as opposed to temp staffing for a second. And still very metrics driven. How many jobs, how many candidates, how many submissions. But you have some recruiters that are so good that they will submit only 3 candidates to a job and their hit rate is 75%. Whereas another recruiter might submit 12 people to a job with a 50%
You would-
hit rate in terms of getting an offer. And AI isn't going to see that difference if it's just looking at metrics. You have to have the humans understanding the context behind what you're doing. But I do think that AI can be a very valuable tool in things like employee relations. The golden rule of management is manage the way that you want to be managed, and the platinum rule is manage the way that the employee wants to be managed. And we're all human, we all do things differently. But especially if you are a manager or an employee relations specialist that has to work with a lot of different employees, you can tailor the tone of your questions. You can tailor the tone of your responses by putting in an AI prompt that gives maybe the summary of what you're trying to say, but ask AI to create 2 versions. Create a summary of this conversation to be presented to an employee who tends to be very defensive in how they view things, or tailor the summary of this investigation to an employee that always thinks that they're the one that did something wrong, whatever the case may be. Like, there are really great tools to input the data and get slightly different responses or slightly different ways of describing something based on what might work best for that individual or their personality.
So that's an example of something where you're adding AI tools into the workflow of a professional, which enhances the output that still that professional does. So assuming it's like you're just improving the output in that particular case. I've heard, just broadly speaking, employee relations, because it's the ultimate HR related compliance aspect of HR. And there's high costs involved with litigation. It's kind of that last line. And because there's a person to person communication element to it, in some ways, it might have the most upside and examples like you just mentioned of, trying to improve the outcome, but the demand for those roles and what is being done may be about the same, even like 5, 10 years down the line. I don't know, would you subscribe to that, or you have any thoughts on how much demand there will be for the function?
I don't know that I see it changing that much. I think most HR teams are already pretty lean and it's a really important function. So if you are a company that doesn't have it, that outsources it, you're still going to outsource it. If you're a company that has that in-house, you probably don't have 12 people doing it anyway. So I don't know that I see that role changing that much in terms of the basic tenets of the role and maybe how many people do it. You said it very succinctly. I think that AI will help the output of those roles.
So maybe what they're doing in that could be part of that. And then if I were to zoom out and we just talk about the broader HR function, how do we and think about all the elements to that, like how do we future proof HR within the world of AI?
I think recruitment, internal recruitment is probably going to be the greatest disruptor with AI. But again, there has to be a human element 100% of the time. But the human element might, instead of taking 6 hours in a day, maybe AI is spending the vast majority of the time and the HR professional is spending 2 hours in the day. So I do think it's going to be a disruptor in the recruitment space. But also, as we discussed in terms of the cat and mouse game, the candidates are going to try to beat the system too. So you're going to need the humans in HR to help catch that and manage that as well.
Great point. Thank you for this awesome conversation. We've covered a few different things, but before we summarize, how can people connect with you, Marnie, and follow your thoughts and your journey?
Yeah. Find me on Marni Helfand on at LinkedIn. I love hearing from people. Happy to connect on any topics. Again, like to me, that's what networking is for, is just to learn. So would love to hear from anyone.
Love it. So thank you for the conversation. There's so many key themes that are standing out to me from this. And overall, just coming from an employee relations and legal background, being forward thinking on AI, it's at least for my simple brain, it's like a big juxtaposition, right? Especially within the world of HR, where as we've discussed, a lot of folks are on the back foot or are not, I think you said apathetic to it. So I just think the thinking that you bring to this is quite unique. And I thought it was very valuable to go through in detail the various elements that you consider, not just from a compliance standpoint, but also from a business standpoint in considering how you might execute on an AI project. And I think there's lessons for really like any kind of function and any kind of project with that in mind. And it seems like a good perspective, I think you shared about how, regardless of what happens with a lot of the different sub functions, employee relations and ensuring there's like that last line of defense in for companies, that role actually maybe is not going to shift too much, but the outputs and how you might go about it will require reskilling, even if that is a role that is not going to change so much, which probably means, of course, we all should be reskilling and be prepared for it. So thank you so much for this conversation, Martin. And to everyone out there, thanks for following along and follow for more as we talk about how we can future-proof HR and go from surviving to actually thriving in the age of AI. Thanks again. See y'all next time.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Proof HR. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on the platform you're listening to or watching us on. Or share this with a friend or colleague who may find value in the message. See you next time as we keep our pulse on how we can all thrive in the age of AI. Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.